What's up, Wolverine fans? Jack here with another episode of the Big and Bold College Football Show. Yes, on today's episode, it is the Wisconsin preview. This is their biggest game of the year thus far, and that's why I'm giving it its own bigger preview than other games they've played up to this point. Now, to lay out what it's going to be, just to sort of give you an overview of the episode, I'm going to start off with where the two teams are at this point, just to speed up, the kind of here's where they are right now after 4 games for Michigan, 3 games for Wisconsin. And then my 3 key points heading into the game that I like to do with all of Michigan's games. We're going to go over those key points next week when we do my overview of the game. And then I'm going to compare the rosters of both teams. Going to go offense, defense, compare position group by position group, and see who beats out who in that matchup. And then go over a few other advantages or disadvantages that either team can have, and we're going to use that as a sort of working point on who's going to win this football game based on that criteria that we have. Then I'm going to look at Michigan's keys to victory, and finally my prediction for the game. But thank you for my listeners. This is a brand new show that I've got going, and I really hope you guys enjoy it, and let me know in the comments how it can be better. That's the first thing I ask you. Second is please like and subscribe because it really helps me out as I try to grow the channel. Make sure to check back in with the Big and Bold to look at my upcoming video of the preview for some of the biggest games coming up this weekend. We've got a lot of good ones that are coming up this Saturday. But with that, let's jump into the preview. It's why you guys are here. Now, let's start with Michigan first and get that out of the way. Of course, Michigan is 4-0. They've had 3 dominant performances and 1 less than impressive win so far on the schedule. So, of course, that includes, rolling past Western Michigan, Washington, Northern Illinois. And then the only thing really casting doubt is that 20-13 Rutgers game. They have a real lack of a passing game, fairly mistake-free, but a real lack of a passing game. Brand new looking defense with new defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald. And a fantastic run game. But again, with that Rutgers game, that came into question a little bit. At this point, Michigan is 4-0 and ranked 14th in the country. Now for Wisconsin, they're 1-2, unranked in the top 25 after they originally came in, I believe, at 12th in the country. You think, man, Wisconsin's 1-2, this shouldn't be that interesting a matchup. But I've got a few bits of information that would lead you to believe otherwise. So they're 1-2. Had a really close defensive battle with Penn State to start the year off. When they lost that game week 1 at home, ran through Eastern Michigan before losing in a bad way to Notre Dame. Now, the funny thing about that Notre Dame game, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit when I go over my overview of this past weekend's games, is you look at the final score of 41-13 and think, my goodness, Wisconsin got killed. They actually went into the fourth quarter with a lead in a very low-scoring game. But several non-offensive scores for Notre Dame turned that into an absolute slaughter in the fourth quarter. And right now, Wisconsin is kind of a wounded animal, you could say. That's kind of the popular term for it. They are down, and they are looking for a big win to help turn their season around. Now, my 3 key points heading into this football game. Again, we're going to revisit these next week after the game's been played and see, were these key points significant or not in the game. My first being, which quarterback turns their season around? Graham Mertz or Cade McNamara? And allows their team to win the game or lose the game. Because I highly doubt that the team with the better passing game loses in this contest. I have a feeling that the passing game is going to have a lot to do with it. Cade McNamara has thrown very few passes thus far in the season. Graham Mertz has thrown a lot of interceptions so far in the season. So which quarterback is going to use this to try and propel them forward and motivate themselves and the team and their fan bases that they are the quarterback of the future for their programs? Second point, does the road environment affect Michigan in their first road game? Now, I decided to do some digging, and here's some fun research for you that I did. When you look at Michigan since Jim Harbaugh arrived, I wanted to look back at their losses. How have they done on the road? And I decided to look at 2015 to 2019. So obviously Jim Harbaugh arrives in 2015, Decided to exclude last year's win-loss totals because 2020 was such an abnormal season for the program. It just sort of throws off the data, I think, in an unmeaningful way. You can consider it an outlier if you'd like. I also excluded their Ohio State games because at home or away, Michigan has lost to Ohio State. It really doesn't matter whether it's a road game or a home game for Michigan against Ohio State. So in their losses from 2015 to 2019, excluding Ohio State, 8 out of their 11 losses were on the road. They only lost 3 games outside of the Big House from 2015 to 2019. When you're excluding, the Ohio State games. Now, if you include 2020 in that, it becomes 9 out of their 15 losses were on the road. So still a pretty obvious sign that they're much better in the Big House than they are on the road. But again, 8 of their 11 losses from 2015 to 2019 were on the road. They only lost 2 games in the regular season in 2016. One of those, of course, was Ohio State, so I excluded that from the data. So their only other loss was on the road. That was actually at Iowa. 2017, 2 of their 3 regular season losses, road games. Both of their regular season losses in 2018 were road games, and both of their regular season losses in 2019 were road games. So, of course, again, excluding Ohio State. So Michigan has really struggled on the road when it comes to really playing teams at their level or better. They're just not able to compete on the road all that well. Again, 8 of 11 losses being on the road, that is a crazy number. Also, Michigan hasn't won in Madison, Wisconsin since 2001. They haven't been able to go to Wisconsin and win that game since 2001. Not to mention, Wisconsin's dominated the Wolverines the last 2 years, once in the Big House and on the road. That road contest in 2019 was definitely kind of a killer as well. So with that, Michigan obviously struggles on the road, and that's a big reason why Wisconsin's a favorite in this game. Because, Wisconsin not off to a good start, right? But considering Michigan struggles on the road and there are struggles to beat Wisconsin on the road specifically, you can see why maybe there's a reason Wisconsin is the favorite. And then my third point, the most significant battle in this game, I don't think matter of personnel. I think the biggest matchup in this game is Josh Gaddis versus Jim Leonhard. That to me is what's going to determine this football game. Does Michigan pull something out of their pocket to surprise the Wisconsin defense? Does Jim Leonhard continue to have a really strong defense? Because don't look at that point total in the Notre Dame game and let that sway your opinion of the Wisconsin defense. They still have a fantastic defense there in Madison, Wisconsin, and that's going to have a big impact in this game. With that, let's move on to the next part of the episode. I want to talk about roster versus roster. Who wins out in these different position battles? Let's start with the offense. Keep track of this while I'm going over it, and I'm going to go over this, of course, again at the end. But let's start with the offenses, position group by position group, and see who's got the better offense in this game in our eyes. Now let's start with the quarterback position. Now this one is fairly obvious, I think, for most people. Cade McNamara thus far in the season, 534 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's completed 62% of his passes. That's very different from Graham Mertz, 566 yards, 1 touchdown, and 6 interceptions. He's completed 56% of his passes. So same yardage total with 1 less game. Graham Mertz has thrown a lot more passes, 95, to Cade McNamara's 53. You can kind of see that in that lack of Michigan's passing game, or the lack of attempting to use the passing game. But obviously I'm taking Cade McNamara here. I don't care that Graham Mertz was a higher ranked 4-star than Cade McNamara coming out of high school. They've both played a fairly similar amount of games. I mean, you just have to take it for that. Now, of course, when you look at 6 interceptions for Graham Mertz, 4 of those was against Notre Dame. But he still threw 2 interceptions against Penn State. So give me quarterback for the Wolverines. Now let's look to running back. This might be one that triggers some Wisconsin fans because, they're known for having such great running backs. But in my eyes, Michigan's got the better running back room here as well. Now Wisconsin's got Chez Mellusi, the Clemson transfer. He has 319 yards and 2 touchdowns, 4.6 yards a carry. He's been good, not great. I don't think he's a special type of player. He had a solid game against Penn State, but he was fed the football 31 times, averaged less than 4 yards a carry. And then he's held to 54 yards against Notre Dame. So really what's carrying his stats a little bit is a 144-yard performance against Eastern Michigan in between those two difficult games. Now don't get me wrong, Penn State and Notre Dame, very good programs, good defenses. But at the end of the day, I've got to go with Blake Corum, who's got over 475 yards, 7 touchdowns on the year, 6.9 yards a carry. And you have to factor in Hassan Haskins, 61 carries for 322 yards and 6 touchdowns himself, which is 5.3 yards a carry. Wisconsin's got a good collection of running backs, but with Michigan having over 1,100 yards and 17 touchdowns on the ground in, granted, 4 games against lesser competition, to Wisconsin's 610 and 5 touchdowns when you compare the two teams' rushing totals, I got to take Michigan at running back. Now, the one I was the most torn on was wide receiver. Danny Davis and Kendrick Pryor lead a very good wide receiving core for Notre Dame. Problem has just been inefficient play by Graham Mertz. But they're talented players, over 190 yards for Davis, 130 yards for Kendrick Pryor. Leading the way for Michigan's receiving game is Cornelius Johnson, who has 198 yards and a touchdown on the season. David Baldwin comes behind him with 99 yards and a touchdown, but over 60 of that and that one touchdown he had came on the one pass by J.J. McCarthy in the Western Michigan game. So I think Michigan's receiving core has the better potential, but we haven't really seen them used a whole lot either with the lack of passing at Michigan. So I'm going to give wide receiver to Wisconsin. Tight end, obviously I'm going to give to Wisconsin as well. Jake Ferguson's a really talented player. Again, held back by Graham Mertz. But I don't like Michigan's tight end room. Eric All is the only tight end with a catch so far on the season. 6 for 69 yards. I'm just not a big fan of his, and I'm going to give tight end to Wisconsin. Then finally, offensive line. Now again, this is probably one that's really going to trigger Wisconsin fans. But you look at it, Graham Mertz has been sacked 4 times. Cade McNamara hasn't been sacked once. And Michigan's the team with the outstanding run game. Of course, Michigan struggled a bit against Rutgers, and they haven't played the same caliber of teams that Wisconsin has in 2 out of their 3 games. But Michigan's offensive line has blown open holes. They look really good out there. They're led by Andrew Vestardis at center, Zach Zinter and Trevor Keegan, Ryan Hayes, Andrew Stuber, and they've got plenty of depth behind those guys too. So give me Michigan's offensive line right now, where things currently stand. Let's move on to the defense. Defense was also pretty tricky. Starting with the defensive line, Matt Henningsen, really talented defensive end for them. Isaiah Mullen out there. You really like what you see out of the Wisconsin defensive line. It's a big reason why Wisconsin is the number 1 run defense in the country. So while I like Michigan's defensive linemen of Mozzie Smith, Chris Hinton, those are very good players. They haven't been quite as impactful, partially because of the scheme that is employed at Michigan, but give me Wisconsin's defensive line. Let's move on to linebacker. This was one I was really trying to give to Wisconsin. You have guys like Jack Sanborn out there. He, coming into the year, was viewed as one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. Nick Herbig and players like that, Noah Burks. You like those guys out there for Wisconsin. But when it comes to Michigan, Josh Ross, he has a lot of tackles this season. 29 total tackles on the season, compared to Jack Sanborn's 11. So Sanborn's a really good player, but Ross is the one with all the production right now. Not to mention Nikhai Hill-Green, who's come out as the number 2 linebacker for them with 18 tackles. And if you want to throw Aiden Hutchinson or David Ajabo into the mix as sort of 3-4 defensive ends / outside linebackers, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson's got 4.5 sacks so far in the season. A forced fumble to boot. He looks like he could become a top 10 draft pick in this now upcoming NFL draft and Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So because I'm going to include Hutchinson in that conversation, I like David Ajabo. Josh Ross has been super productive. I'm going to give Michigan the edge at linebacker. I'm not particularly impressed with either team's corners in truth. Wisconsin's secondary has 1 interception on the season. Michigan's secondary has 1 interception on the season. But overall, I'm going to give Wisconsin the edge at corner because I've watched Michigan against subpar talent. Their corners can't be left in man coverage. And they leave open more guys in zone than I would like to. Wisconsin doesn't have that problem as bad, and they've played much better offenses. So I'm going to give Wisconsin the edge at corner. At safety, I'd rather give it to the Wolverines. I think Daxton Hill is in a phenomenal safety. He has 18 tackles on the season. Very rangy defender. 3 passes defended thus far, which comes in at second for the team. He's done that at safety, though. And you can line him up at corner in a one-on-one situation, but he's a really rangy defender. Doesn't have the turnovers you'd like to see, but he makes plays across the field. So I really love Daxton Hill. And Brad Hawkins makes a really great duo there at safety. Not to say that Wisconsin doesn't have a good set of safeties themselves, Scott Nelson and Colin Wilder, but Michigan's safeties have just been more productive thus far in the year, so I give that one to the Wolverines. Now finally, from a position versus position standpoint, let's look at special teams. And this was a difficult one to go with. Their kicking game, you're talking Connor Larsh at kicker for Wisconsin versus Jake Moody. And so far, Jake Moody's just had the better season. He's completed a lot more extra points. And he's 5 of 6 for field goals. Colin Larsh is 5 of 7 for field goals. But so far, Moody's the guy with a field goal of 50 yards or more. Can't say the same thing for Larsh. It's close, but I think Jake Moody's a really good kicker. He's off to a very good start thus far in the season. Not to mention, Michigan's punting game has been really good thus far in the season. And they have a lot of guys that can return punts. And I just think that they put Wisconsin in a more difficult position with the better punt and kickoff returners than that of Wisconsin. So for special teams, I'm going to take the Wolverines. And finally, with home field advantage, obviously that goes to Wisconsin. They have the home field advantage here. That didn't help them against Penn State. But believe me, you know that Wisconsin crowd is ready for the Wolverines to come into Madison, and they want to see the Badgers win a big game. So that crowd's going to be rowdy. Give the home field advantage to Wisconsin, obviously. And then coaching. I talked about this with Josh Gaddis versus Jim Leonhard. Paul Chryst versus Jim Harbaugh. Who's going to scheme up something new that the opposing team hasn't seen yet? Because Michigan can't walk into Madison with the same game plan they had against Rutgers, or else they're going to get killed out there. And Wisconsin can't have the same game plan they did against, say, Penn State or even really Notre Dame, because that probably won't work for them either. Which coaching staff and coordinators are going to go into their bag of tricks and pull something out to win this game? Personally, for the coaching advantage, Jim Leonhard, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. Mike Macdonald seems like a very good defensive coordinator, but not as tested as you'd like to see them up to this point in the year. This isn't me indicting Jim Harbaugh or taking Paul Chryst over Jim Harbaugh, but from a coaching standpoint with more established coordinators specifically, I'm going to take the coaching advantage very slightly to Wisconsin. Not so much because of Paul Chryst, but because of those coordinators, because of the large amount of new coaches on Michigan's coaching staff. So with that, when you go top down, that gives Michigan the advantage at quarterback, running back, and offensive line, while Wisconsin holds the advantage at wide receiver and tight end. Defensively, I give the defensive line the edge to Wisconsin and the cornerback edge to Wisconsin, but linebacker and safety to the Wolverines. Wisconsin gets the home field advantage and a slight coaching advantage, whereas Michigan has the better special teams. Not creating a point system for this, but when you look at that, that essentially leaves these two teams even. They both have, that leaves both teams 6-6 once you count it all up. Now, they're not all equal out to the same, right? Because one would argue having the better quarterback is a lot better than having the better linebacking core, just for example. But 6-6 in terms of that points marking there that I have. So, that's what makes this game so difficult to gauge. You got the number one rush defense in the country in the form of Wisconsin against one of the top run games in the Big Ten, really in the country. Now, I've got my keys to victory here for the Wolverines, and then we're going to jump into my prediction with all this information I've given you. Their first key to victory is going to be jump in front early and make Graham Mertz do what he's done best thus far in the season. That's throw interceptions. As soon as he has attempted to carry his team to victory against Penn State, against Notre Dame, the guy's crumbled and tossed picks. You got to do that over the course of the game to beat Wisconsin down. They're going to have to do a much better job at catching those would-be interceptions, because that's a problem for Michigan's secondary thus far. They're getting their hands on the ball, but they're dropping easy interceptions. Can't do that in this game. They're going to have to strike early with explosive players, and they've got them at Michigan. A.J. Henning, Blake Corum, they've got real explosive guys to do that with. Second key to victory, don't expect Blake Corum to have consistent 5 to 10 yard runs in this game. A couple big plays, 1, 2, 3 big runs over the course of the football game by Blake Corum, that explosive back, or A.J. Henning. We've seen him have big runs in these games thus far. He needs to touch the football more. Get those big splash plays, kind of like what Penn State did against Wisconsin. What busted that game open was a wide open Jahan Dotson downfield, and they were able to break it open with a touchdown. That to me is what Michigan is going to need to do, because don't expect them to have consistently good run game. If they do, I'm going to be incredibly impressed, but I just don't expect that. But what you should expect is maybe a couple big plays. Jahan Dotson's 49-yard reception, Noah Cain's 34-yard run, things like that. That's going to break the game open to help the Wolverines win this one. And finally, try to work the play-action passing. Michigan has almost not at all attempted to utilize play-action passes while running the ball consistently against their opponent. If they can draw Wisconsin 8 guys into the box because they're running it on first, second, and third down, allow Cade McNamara to hit them with deep passes down the field to some of those explosive receivers that they have, like A.J. Henning and Roman Wilson, those speedy guys. Use those play-action passes in conjunction to running the football to try and break the game open. I don't know if they're going to do it. But as you can tell, with my keys to winning the game, it's getting up early on Wisconsin. It's very simple. Once you get up early on them, you can allow guys like David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson to pin their ears back and get after Graham Mertz. Finally, my prediction for this game, it's hard to imagine Wisconsin struggling so many weeks in a row. Most of it has to do with their schedule thus far. They had a couple bad breaks in the fourth quarter against Notre Dame. They allowed a big play by Jahan Dotson against Penn State. Things like that kill you, and that's killed their year thus far. Realistically, this is a difficult matchup for the Wolverines. They haven't done well on the road. Their passing game isn't particularly developed. Their run game wasn't great against Rutgers. Granted, it's been fantastic on the season, but you're facing a great run defense in the form of Wisconsin. They've got the more experienced coordinators and coaches. There's just a lot going against Michigan. Granted, this is kind of what I talked about with the Wisconsin-Notre Dame game. That is, when you have the advantage at quarterback, you can make some things happen. If Graham Mertz throws an interception early in the game and Michigan capitalizes, that can be enough for them to win this ball game once we look back on it. Because they're so close in terms of roster versus roster, I would imagine this is going to be a close football game. I'm going to take the Wolverines 20-17 to win this game. But that could easily be Wisconsin 20-17 winning as well. I think it can come down to making a field goal. The referees judging a touchdown or not a touchdown. It's little inches, things like that determine a football game. Now, hey, that's what we were thinking with the Wisconsin-Notre Dame game. That's not how that went in the fourth quarter, of course, maybe 3 quarters of that game. But I am going to take the Wolverines as a hopeful win here. Obviously, history's not looking on their favor. Facing a great run defense when you're a run-first team is not placing the game in your favor. But if Michigan does win this game, they are probably a top 10 team or a borderline top 10 team. A lot on the line here for the Wolverines to prove a lot of people wrong that they're legit and it's not just their schedule. And this is a big opportunity for Wisconsin to turn around what's been an absolutely terrible start to the year for them. So, with that said, guys, really difficult game to predict. I'm almost just taking the Wolverines as a hopeful prediction because, again, at the end of the day, on the road, great run defense. That's going to be tough for the Wolverines to get over. But ideally, Cade McNamara helps lead them to victory in a tough, gritty battle. And having high upside, borderline elite defenders like Aiden Hutchinson, Josh Ross, Daxton Hill, that keeps Wisconsin in check. I don't think Wisconsin has any special players on offense, and that's going to help them out a lot. So thank you for listening, everybody. This has been a big preview, a lot I talked about. I hope you guys liked it. Expect previews like these for only a few more games on the season. Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, games like that, where everything is kind of in the balance for Michigan's season. So definitely going to be watching that game this weekend, and I'll definitely give you guys a great overview of how it goes. Please like and subscribe, comment, get some discussions going for this game, and have a good one, everybody.